I've just got tasked to chase them up. Early on in my career, Noel. Righto, so this is the second of our 3 workshops today. So on the Waikato CDEM group, you know, it is a mandated committee for us through government legislation. We have Julian Snowball, Group Manager and Controller, joining us down the far end. So welcome, Julian. And for your information, we do have Councillor Mahuta and Councillor Nicol online as well. So the room is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Greetings, Chair, Deputy Chair and Councillors. He mihi mahana kia koutou katoa, ko Julian Snowball toko ingoa. As has been pointed out, I am the Group Controller, Group Manager of the Waikato Civil Defence Group. I do hail no Wales or ho. I do hail from Wales. I'd like to get up front normally, so I'm not confused with being from England, but given the recent rugby scores, I probably regret highlighting my Welsh pedigree. So I'm here to give you an overview of the Civil Defence Group. And I won't read word for word from the slides. I'll just pick bits out. But please feel free to stop me as we go along. That will probably be the easiest for me rather than wait until the end because I'll forget what I've said. So the Civil Defence Group is a legislative committee that is born out of the Civil Defence Act 2002. Now that act is currently up for review. I'll come to that later, but as it currently stands, it says every regional council and every territorial authority must unite and create a civil defence group. And once that group was created, you can't get out of it. So back in the day, in 2002, the Waikato Civil Defence Group, which was under the within the regional council boundaries, was created, and it created the largest civil defence group in terms of members in New Zealand. So it looks like it went from, it was based on catchment. Okay, it went from the lake along the river, and that's how it was done. I think if we did it today, it would be slightly different, where you would get a lot of people from Lake Taupo, from Taupo might look over towards the east, and you've got some of the hazardscape and some of the natural allegiances or alliances for Taupo might go over to the east. But the current act says once you've united to create and establish a group, you can't get out of that bed, you're in it, so to speak. So on that committee, and it might sound very similar to something that was announced the other day in terms of boards, territorial boards, the joint committee says that every member, every local authority and the regional council must be represented by one person being the mayor or the chairperson of that local authority, or somebody delegated on behalf of the chair or mayor of those authorities. And in the case of where it's not a unitary authority, like where we are, then the group must be administered, because of those 11 different entities, that group must be administered by the chief executive of the regional council in this case. And we talk about administration in the purest local government New Zealand Act purposes. That's what it's pretty much intended to be. So all the meetings that are run for the Civil Defence Group are run under Chris Macleay, so the chief executive's signature, are using local government rules and making sure everything abides with the Local Government Act. That's what it meant from a purely administrative point of view. But from a practical point of view, I'll talk later on, the administrative services actually go a lot further for the Waikato Civil Defence Group, and justifiably so. Really importantly, and I stress this a number of times throughout my presentation, really importantly, funding. I refer to funding a number of times throughout the presentation. What the Act says, what the legislation says, unless members agree to the contrary, then every member of the group must pay 1 equal share of the budget for the regional services. So you can imagine the disparity, whatever the budget, whether it's large or small, you will get, if you follow the basics of the legislation that every member pays one equal share, you would end up with Hamilton City Council paying the same as Oklahoma or as Hauraki. And patently, that's not fair in terms of per ratepayer. So we do have a different approach here. Thank you. So a little bit about the Waikato Group. I think I've told, I mentioned, we are the largest civil defence group in New Zealand by members, with 11 local authorities. Beyond us is is Canterbury with 10. Our complexity is further heightened because we've got 5 neighbouring civil defence groups, which is more than anybody else. We have 4 police districts within our area, one being the Waikato, but there are some on our borders where the police districts operate within our civil defence group area. We've got 2 FENS regions as it currently stands, although FENS is currently going under another reorganisation or a restructure, so that might change again. We've got, I think it's 3 MSD regions. I say multiple, but it's 3. It's down at Taupo, 1 up in Auckland, and then for the Waikato. And we have some very complex iwi partnerships. And what I mean by that is the partnerships for civil defence with iwi are predominantly or importantly, at a local authority level, and each of the local authorities operate a different partnership model. They're not all the same, whether it's a JMA or it's a forum, or there are new partnership agreements being drafted at the moment, or some of the iwi don't yet have partnerships. So it's a complex space. Thank you. And that's pictures there to outline that actually the civil defence boundaries don't naturally align with the Waikato Regional Council's boundaries. So you will see reports sometimes where I refer to the area covered by the Waikato WCDEMG group, and that's a deliberate statement because it's not the same as the Waikato Regional Council. Waikato Regional Council covers part of Rotorua. We don't. Rotorua is not within the civil defence group area. That is within the Bay of Plenty. And you will see that part of our group area would go into the Manawatu Wanganui. Thank you. So what we're required to do as a civil defence group, so that group of mayors or delegates, and it's what you would expect, is research and science advice around identifying hazards, managing how we're going to manage them, communicating those risks to the community. So all that readiness space and reduction space, how we can reduce the risk and be ready for the risk. Probably the largest portion of that goes into making sure that we've got suitably trained people ready to go. And for an area of our complexity with 11 different councils, not everything can be run out of the group office across there. We're a team of 15. We could not stand up an emergency and run an emergency from the centre. We rely on the territorial authorities to be able to manage their local emergencies. And we also rely, and we're very successful in this, in terms of having people consistently trained so we can support some of our smaller councils by sending people from councils who are not activated. So, for example, we might send people from Waikato Regional Council and Hamilton down to Taupo or up to Thames, would be the 2 recent examples. Or when you get down to the bottom line here, you can see that we're also required under the legislation to support other civil defence groups. And we've been very successful in, because we've got that consistent training and pool of trained people across the region, being able to send people down to Nelson, for example, was one of the recent ones, and Southland. So there's nothing in there that you wouldn't expect us as a civil defence, or you wouldn't expect civil defence to do. So how we do that, and again, this is done through a strategic plan. The strategic plan is not the Waikato Regional Council's corporate plan. We don't, whilst we sit within the employment of Waikato Regional Council, we have our own strategic plan as a group. So sometimes, again, in terms of the reporting that we're asked to do, it might sound a little bit resistant, but it's not. It's trying to say we report to the Joint Committee. So the mayors or their delegates, and we report to the coordinating executive group, which is the committee of the chief executives, and we report on, and we're required legislatively to report and monitor on this, which is a totally separate strategic plan to the Waikato Regional Council's plan. So we're not being difficult when we say that's not, the Regional Council's corporate plan is not our plan. The legislation, this is a legislatively binding document that commits all the members to achieving the goals outlined in there. And each of the members is required, each of the local authority members, including the Regional Council as an individual member, is required to report on their performance to achieve the objectives outlined in that plan. And that's just been signed off recently. It's for 5 years. That's just been signed off in September, October by the minister. Thank you. So how we're funded, I said I would touch this. I mentioned earlier that there's that 1 equal share, and that would be patently unfair for the smaller councils and really good for the bigger councils. So for context for you, we as a civil defence group at a regional budget wise, we are one of the leanest in terms of budget. If you look at who, there's 8 other civil defence groups who are structured the same as us in terms of a devolved model and a central support. And most of them are much smaller. And out of those 8, we are the 5th. We have the 5th. We're 5 out of 8 when it comes to budget. We're currently operating around the $3.1 million at a regional. But out of that, it's around, don't get me into the detail, but it's around $500,000 is the operating budget. The rest is salaries and overheads. So
I'll just stop you there, Julian, because I noticed Chris's light's on. Did you want to question it now, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just interested in the funding model, because I would have thought a risk-based model would have been much more equitable to all people involved. Pyro is much greater risk than Hamilton City, with due respect. But what is the risk in Hamilton City? And yet we're obviously paying a significant percentage of your 3.1 million.
Earthquake, fire.
Yeah, but we've got
Electric cars blowing
all the
up.
facilities are here.
Electric
Whereas you go to
buses
Pyro, there's just nothing there.
We can swim.
The risk
is nothing.
where's all your services? Bullshit. Look, the legislation sets up. Excuse me, would you be quiet? The legislation sets up a structure for a purpose, and I would say that reflects it's a risk-based approach. There is no way in the world that a Matamata can afford the same sort of sophisticated services that Hamilton can. Therefore, it's higher risk. And I'm just challenging why you've gone down that path.
Well, I wasn't. So in terms of the legislation, I don't think the legislation, being candid, I don't think the legislation meets the risk-based approach. It just, you pay 1 equal share. If you were to pay 1 equal, if you do it on a risk-based approach, TCDC would be paying far more than Otahonga, and TCDC and Hauraki, because of where they are, would be paying more than Hamilton City. I would say to you, the people of, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, I'm being candid, is the people of Christchurch said that Christchurch was safe before 2011. And it goes back to the old Donald Rumsfeld conversation around the unknowns. And I believe, so some of the science I have seen in terms of the fault lines that sit in the periphery of Hamilton as a Hamilton Basin, and the topography or the soil, etc. I'm not a scientist, but it's like a bowl of jelly that we sit on here. I don't think Hamilton I don't think we know exactly what risks exist for Hamilton. It's just, they are the unknowns. It's very similar to Christchurch. But if you're right, if you were to look at it from what's a known risk, then Hamilton would not be on that list. But where we went as a group, and I don't know, well, I do know, I wasn't here, where we went as a group, and I think it is looked at with envy by other civil defence groups when they look at the funding model that we've got, rather than having one equal share per council, they've gone every ratepayer in the region pays the same.
Yeah.
So that's why it's been brought to the civil defence group. It was the region at the time, under Councillor Verco, I believe it was, and Councillor Smith might remember because he was there. It was the region at the time actually said, we can't have this one equal share. The fairest way to do it, and the most future-proof way of doing it is having every house that's built has a fixed rate under the UGAC, and every house pays an equal share. So it's done on population.
No.
Yeah, look, Christchurch came about, I think it was 2010, 2011, and I was heavily involved. I think I did 15 years on the group. The reality was every council was rating for civil defence and paying a figure across to a region to do the work. It was appalling. It was around about 50 cents a property on average. And I was one of the ones that actually really drove this. Hugh was in there with me. And we went out and we asked people, what would you be prepared to pay to fund civil defence so that you could have a service? Because look, we were surveyed by a national body and Waikato came out at 47% prepared, one of the worst in the country. That's moved considerably, and I congratulate Julian, for his work and his predecessor in setting up Waikato as one of the best in the country now. So we went out and we asked the public, and public said we would pay up to $50 a property. And regional councils at the time said, hey, we're not increasing our rates because it reflects on the regional council's rates. That's too high. What do we really need? And so we've moved it up. Was it about $12 now, something? 15 now. But the reality is the people told us they wanted a service and a structure in place that when the shit hit the fan, we were there to support the communities and they were prepared to pay. And that's what the community told us they wanted. So I'm sorry, Chris, your risk-based just doesn't work. The community wanted us to do it and do it then. I'm sorry, I'm still passionate about it.
Reconsult then, Mr. Smith.
Look, I'm happy for that to happen, but at the time, we did the best with the information and what the community wanted, not what we wanted.
Thanks. No, it's good to understand how we got to this space, so which is learnings. Gary Maguire. Right. Gary Raymer. Third time lucky.
Oh, mine was just to endorse what Noel's said, and there has been a lot of work even over the past 3 years when we've had all these events, and it's not just Christchurch. You look at Nelson, every area that's had disasters and have been way, we've gone from 1 in 100 years now to 1 in 10. So it is a whole community that needs to, and it was endorsed in that, and even in consultation with iwi over the last that was high on that and welfare places to have as well. So yeah, I just thought
I will chirp now. Yeah, I agree with you, Noel, totally. I don't think that it would be fair to go on a risk base because you never know what that risk is going to be, and it could be any number of different things. It could be something just totally out of left field. Whereas sharing it equally, I think you've done a great job there. Thanks.
Gary Raymer.
Yeah, and so I actually endorse that. I'd like everything on the uniform and annual charge actually, but from a risk perspective, a lot of our industries are actually centralising back into the Waikato and Hamilton, and I know that because of the sheer lack of risk in here, earthquake and things like that. It's seen as a really low risk area. And the other thing too is if there is a major disaster, I think that the economic impact of that will be shared by the whole region. Just a comment, not a question.
I'm getting the hang of this. Thanks, Gary. Back to you, Julian.
So one of the things that comes up in terms of this rating conversation, and there's no doubt it'll come up soon with the next LTP, is that the joint committee or the combined board of mayors, they sit down and in this case, it'll be Councillor Maguire on behalf of the regional council. That is where the regional council gets to exert their influence and their voice at that table around what the proposals are and what not. Sometimes I have felt like a little bit of a meat in the sandwich when I've then come across the road and the regional council, as the administrating authority and as the organisation that has taken up this gold standard, and it really is, it's looked at very, very favourably by others, is you've taken up the rating task on behalf of everyone. Sometimes what's agreed at the joint committee might be at odds with a cap that the regional council has set itself. So, for example, you might say that we are going for X%, and that's something that Chris McClay will then push across the business departments in terms of when we're doing our development for the LTP. But you might find that the joint committee, as though that committee of mayors turn around and say, actually, our request of rates goes above that cap. And I come back and stress it's the will of that combined group of that joint committee, and it's a story. It's not unfortunate, but it's the role then is the regional council to say, look, we've capped our rates as an organisation at X, but we have had, and it happened with the building across the road, where the building across the road created a rate increase above the zero that the zero rate increase that the chair of the day said, Mr. Rivington said, we're not going to have a rate increase, but the building created an increase of sorts. And that story had to be told because it's something that you have influence but no control over ultimately. So, yeah. So I'm kind of saying in a nice way, please don't shoot the messenger when I come back. Because it becomes a recurring.
That's a point well made, because this council did, members of the council challenged that, because that decision by the group impacted our rating base. But the reality is you have to isolate that, and in the new structure that the government appears to be promoting with this rating stuff, you would go to the regulator and say, this is a region-wide, or the mayors would, and say, this is our joint decision, ring fence it. So there are, but you know, like, if we didn't have something in place, you'd certainly be getting shot theoretically by the community. So at what price do we put on our safety and support?
Thank you. So emergency powers. So this is what people mostly associate with civil defence. So the legislation in its purest form says that every CDEM group, so every collective, must appoint at least one person who's authorised to declare emergency or or issue a notice of a recovery or transition period. What we then put into our legislative document, so that group plan or that strategic plan is a legislative document, is how we're going to do that. That's more resilient than appointing one person. And what we have in that document is that the chair of the joint committee, whomever that will be when they're elected, is the first port of call for any declarations at a regional level. They're still called local declarations, but they're the primary person, followed by the deputy, whoever the deputy is. And in the absence of either of those, it can be any member of the joint committee. So, and that includes, well, joint committee is the primary and the alternate. They've both been obviously nominated. So that's the hierarchy. We're required to create a hierarchy, and that's what we've outlined. So Councillor Maguire, as the WRC joint committee member, will fall into one of those three, depending on what happens on the 15th of December. He will fall into one of those three settings. He could be the chair, he could be the deputy chair, or he could be one of the members that we go to in the absence of the chair and the deputy chair. What that doesn't do, that is for anywhere in the region or for the region as a whole, or the group area as a whole, not Rotorua. So that's, yeah, for any part of the region or the region as a whole. But nothing I've just outlined there, however, stops a mayor or their delegate from declaring a local emergency in their district only. So, and that would be the preference. is each mayor, and I'll give you a practical example of the Cyclone Gabriel for us about where we sat in that. So it is important that each mayor has the manner of their holds the manner of their council, and they are seen to do the right thing by their community. So you had individual mayors declaring local emergencies as the weather moved down and it became clear that those councils were going to be issued or going to be impacted. What we set up at the regional level was, once neighbours started declaring next door to each other, once that happened, we were at risk of those organisations competing for the same resource, whether it's the police, whether it is roading resources, and then it would have been loudest voice or deepest pockets potentially. So what we did at that point was we then declared the chair declared a regional state of emergency. So those decisions around coordination came up to the regional office, but the delivery of civil defence is still done at that local level where councils understand their communities and they have that relationship.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, John, I don't know whether this is the right form to bring it up, but there's going to be 8 new members on the CD because a lot of members haven't been voted in. We did have Anna Park that became chairperson after Hugh, and then she stood down, and then we got Lou, who was the deputy chair, to be chair. He isn't back in the committee, so my concern is that, and it's concern because I find, and Noel will agree with me, this is quite an important committee, or it's a very important committee, and that's proven when we went out to consultation, and every ratepayer pays a certain amount to it. And you're right, Gary, the economic impact if something happens in any area, we looked at even the State Highway 25 when the bridge went out, and what happened up there, people trying to get to hospitals and stuff like that, medical facilities. The truck went into Lake Taupo and it had chemicals on it, and then everything went down the Waikato River. It affects everyone right through the region. So it is an important committee, and I feel, I don't know whether that's a discussion that we should have. I know it's up to the 15th, on the 15th, it's up to them, but I'd like some consistency in that chairperson, that's because it's such an important role on, do we have influence on that, Julian, as a Waikato Regional Council? Is it something that's just left for that day on the 15th?
So I think really good, there's a couple of questions there, really good questions, Deputy Chair. So yes, you have influence. You have influence through Councillor Maguire because he's the member. So whatever happens, this is my observation will be, obviously I can't get involved in who's the chair and the deputy chair. That is for the members to arrange for themselves, and that will be, some people will opt, as I've already had some conversations with some councillors, and some have said, look, it's not for me, I will not be putting my hand up. Quote unquote, for one councillor, I'm a sit back and watch for a period of time, and I'm not a put myself forward. I want to learn the role. But there were others with transferable skills. Okay, that might not have been a joint committee member last year, that will have transferable skills in that space. What I would say, with 8 new members, whomever the chair and the deputy chair is, they will be, I have no doubt, they will be relying on there will be a lot of reliance on the 3 carryovers from the previous triennium. So because a lot of progress was made, a lot of change discussed, etc., that needs to carry on through, certainly in the last 3 years with government inquiries, new group plans, etc. So I think whomever is voted in will still need to rely on the corporate memory, if you want, of the 3 previous councillors who served, who are coming back. In an ideal world, you would look and say, is one of those, is the chair or the deputy chair one of those 3?
No.
I'm going to say this, and I don't know that I hope I don't regret it, but I'm going to say it anyway. What I found, Alan Sanson approached me, and it was Peter Harris in 2007, and then Alan carried on. I was selected because of my background. But
And
one of
good
the,
looks.
well, I
With
had
respect.
good looks back then apparently, but I don't know. The reality is it's the mayors who populate that or their delegate. But what I found over the time that I was there was that mayors would delegate that to the new boy or the new girl, or a councillor that they were trying to find a role for. My experience was, quite frankly, a lot of them were, well, they just weren't fit to be there because they weren't at the high enough bloody level to be strategically thinking about the region and their skills and their background. And in critical times, when the brown stuff hits the fan, we need people at that level, and certainly in the chair role. Hugh was excellent at it in his dictator role. And I say that with the best of intentions because Hugh, with his military background, bang, 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 he really ran a good ship. People with the right skills need to be there. So if there's any way in which we can influence and look at and perhaps make alliances, you know, or get people to rethink who's around that table. I don't know, but you know, the decisions have been made. But the reality is a lot of time, and I'm not asking Julian to comment, but there have been people around that table that I have not really met the role, in my view. Thank you.
I think Julian's outlined where our input is.
You know, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just want to add on to that, and Tipper probably would too. It's an important funnel too for iwi, because we had a lot of feedback in the last 3 years, especially with COVID and stuff like that. A lot of iwi were relied on to feed their community, and not only their community, I mean the community in the whole. So, you know, civil defence is a big thing that does channel right down through the JMAs and through consultation. So it is, I find it a very important role.
And we are seeing changes in that iwi space and that inclusiveness. Gary.
My thoughts are that we're going to be gone in 2 years' time, 18 months' time. So my thought would be that the chair preferably would be the most experienced people that are there now. When I talk of being the newbie on the block, yes, I am, but I come from a strong background of emergency services and civil defence. I'm currently head of the response group that looks after Tuakau, Pokeno, all that area up there, and my background in emergency services with as being a full-time volunteer ambulance officer for a couple of years, and family that are heavily involved in it, multiple family. So, but I feel that I will do my best to bring those skills to the table, but I don't think that I should be the one that would be pushing forward to become chair because of our duration. I don't think that, I think if you want continuity and you want the best people, and as Mikhail said, the work with iwi, the community response groups that the Waikato District Council have got set up that I'm involved with as well, work very closely with iwi and the Marais, and they're so well set up to step up when the need is there. So
Thanks for Gary. Thanks, Gary. I don't think anyone's questioning your position from this council into that space. So rest assured, Keith.
Yeah, Julian, thanks for presenting and being here for questions and that sort of thing. I have recently stepped down from president of Waikato Federated Farmers, and what I'm concerned about, there seems to be quite a bit of disconnect between providers and that sort of thing. And so we had monthly meetings, and sometimes it was more regular than that, and we call it the core cluster, which had a lot of parallel organisations, NIWA and generally was chaired by the Rural Support Trust. So I don't see any connection there, and I think that's a failing. Particularly, there's quite a few of us come from a rural community. So the first response in a rural community is the local people. And in the past, they've been badly treated, treated with disrespect, and yet they have ability to make decisions quickly. They've got resources, materials, machinery to make things happen. Now, in terms of past examples, so you're talking about Kaikoura and you've mentioned that. What's been really interesting, because I've got an interest in this as well, is that as soon as you bring the big companies in, the Higgins and the Downers and all that sort of thing, they start milking the system. If you want quick decisions, people use and announce. You use local contractors, you know, people with the local digger operators and that sort of thing. So I'm just challenging you that there's a big hole there that we as a region are not picking up. The other part is I just cannot understand why we haven't got a selection of Bailey bridges there to be rolled out throughout the country and use the military. You know, we've got the Army and we've got the Army Reserves, and they're the last to be brought in. They're trained for quick response, but we don't use them. So there's an element, what I call arrogance, of somebody thinks they've got a monopoly on intelligence and somebody's got a monopoly on quick response. If you want quick response, you don't get bureaucrats sitting in an office in Hamilton to do it. You want people that are used to dealing with decision making.
Pack that one. So first and foremost, I think the easy one out of that is fully aware of the rural cluster chaired by Neil Bateup. We are part of that rural cluster. Given me a challenge to go and find out why people who attend are not clearly as visible, because they do go and we actually facilitate it, but they're clearly not promoting themselves that civil defence are there. But we facilitate that meeting. We support Neil Bateup to do. But in your previous role, you were, and fully understand you would have been there, clear that we've not blown the flag well enough to show that we're there. So that's something I will take back to challenge the staff and ask for how visible are we. In terms of the local delivery, 100% agree with you in terms of the in terms of that's why we have a devolved model. It is something you won't think it. I'm 21 years old, but I've got a grey beard, and it's all to do with the so it's all to do with the devolved model. The devolved model of the best thing to do is to allow the local authorities to respond in local. We don't do the communities well enough. The councils well, but it's an organisation rather than a collective collaboration with the community. Our new group plan, that new strategic plan that I put up there from September, October this year, that has a dial turn in relation to how we, not just in the previous approach, it was about community engagement. That was more around telling the community what we were doing, I would suspect, rather than community participation. We want community participation and we want community ownership. How successful that's going to be a challenge. And that deals to your, deals to your analogy, bureaucrat. The community should own it, not me or anybody else sat over there. So I hear you. The challenge when we start talking about the bigger contract in terms of the scale is when you've got national assets. I would suspect when you've got your likes of your State Highway 25, and they belong to another agency. The responsibility for we might decide where in the line of priority the reparations might be at a regional level and say the road is more important than the electricity because we need to get someone to go get the cows out, get the milk out, or get the electricity repaired. But ultimately the roads are going to be the vehicle, pardon the pun, to get that reparation done. But NZTA we don't tell NZTA how to fix their roads or which contractors to use. NZTA will do where it needs repairing first and when they do the rest. So there is a balance to be struck, and that's the same with the NZDF. The Bailey bridges, I can't answer to that. That would be a conversation I'm more than happy to pick up with them. I just want to reassure you that we do have a really good relationship with the NZDF. The process being that we are, at a moment's notice, we can have, and we have used, the local territorial is about 20 people with a very basic transport and motor and communications. We've got at the drop of a hat. We don't have to ask any permission for that. Just a phone call from myself or the duty controller. However, if we want more than that, we actually have to go and go through Joint Force Headquarters. So we have to go through the National Emergency Management Agency and request that, and it gets put into Wellington, and they'll decide whether or not we're getting any more resource. What we have found even when we use the territorial forces is that we've got to, it's not a case of we are short of personnel. There has got to be, we are short of personnel, and there is a life critical gap that they will be filling. We have, and I can tell you, we've used them from, I don't say bitter experience because it was done in a very nice way, but I have had the message and I've had my knuckles slapped for actually, why have you pulled them out? That was, and it was in the TCDC area. Why have you used the Defence Force? That's not really what they're there for. You're treating them as a, this is me paraphrasing. It was much nicer than this, but they're not a taxi service. They're not a taxi service for ferrying the community and workers back and forth to these places. That's what they were being used as. So they are there, but not on the scale. They're a small group, but I still got to justify.
Just one other thing is, so could you give us, Julian, some clarification on the terms of the legal and the consents and all that sort of thing? Because I was interviewed by central government at one stage, and I said the best thing we can do these days is to get a Hercules and drop a whole lot of orange cones out so that people can get on with the business. Because in the process, people are, particularly the bureaucrats, are blocking the process because you can't do this and you can't do that. But in an emergency, you need to act, and common sense should prevail.
It depends which you are.
Depends on
it depends where we are in terms of the magnitude of the. So for example, if it's a declared emergency, then there are provisions under the RMA where the emergency works can be done, and I don't know if the RMA is going to change, but as it currently stands and has been historically, under a declared emergency, you can just push that to one side as long as we're making a conscious decision. It's not ignoring it. It's saying I am about to ignore or not ignore, override a piece of legislation. I then need to retrospectively come back and have a look at the implications of. So the Civil Defence Act is exactly there for that, but it has to be a declared emergency until they're in. You're in a really grey area where it's not a declared emergency. When it's not a declared emergency, then it is influence and agitation rather than leadership and direction from the civil defence. So all the rules and all the regulations and all of none of those get a mitigation or a treatment. Civil defence declaration, or particularly that allows us to rethink the appropriateness of some of the hurdles or the challenges that we face, such as legislation. What I would say is, and it's really interesting on this slide, the Minister of Emergency Management met with, and I don't know if you've spoken to any of your mayoral colleagues, but the Minister a couple of weeks ago got all the mayors together on a call, and the Minister made it very, very clear that his expectation, although his expectation is that we should be more proactive using declarations. We should be than we have been or hitherto, and we should be erring on the side of caution and going early rather than trying to do it afterwards. So if you look at that culture and that message that he's sending, that should, if it's followed through, because bear in mind, I come back to it's either the chair of the joint committee, the deputy chair of the joint committee, or a mayor or the delegate that issues the declaration. Ultimately, it's their responsibility. They follow through on the intent or the message from the minister, then there'll be more declarations and therefore more opportunity to bypass some of the more troublesome.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, and Chris and myself were both on that call, and the minister was very complimentary of Southland for moving quickly in that space. Robbie, did you want to add something? No. Gary.
I had a very good meeting with Julian last week, and we discussed things like the Whakaari White Island, the situations when the cavalry is not on the way, and enabling communities to get out and start looking after themselves a lot more, and making resources available, whether that's funded where it is now, or whether the request is for more central government funding to go into that. The example being what Auckland has been given a lot of money recently to upgrade their four different response groups, and they've got fantastic backup there, which is able to go into the community. So I was really impressed to see the setup that Julian and his team have got over there with the new GIS system that has got a really clear picture over the whole region, and that has got it such a good base. So with the new response groups getting underway, which we've been going for about the last 18 months now, 2 years now probably, that sort of thing is, the response groups are putting it back onto the communities to act, to look after each other when the cavalry's not coming. So I think we're setting ourselves up in pretty good stead. And thank you, Julie.
Thanks. I'll just jump in there quickly with an example that I had, and it's probably something picking up on what Noel said earlier, and around capability around that table. And so one thing, Gary, we're trusting in you to basically support a good people into these roles that we're seeing here, but also making sure, I guess, whether it's the mayors or whether it's a delegate, and hopefully it's not, but they understand this emergency works availability, and that we had the issue of some coastal erosion going on up in Whitianga, and protection of council land and property. Contractors on site, concrete blocks on site to be able to drop into that face that the ocean was hitting. Another storm on its way, arriving that night. And this was relative to TCDC running around asking regional council, can we put those blocks in place, and not understanding the Emergency Management Act, and that it overrules. They don't need to come to us for a consent to put something in a coastal marine area, et cetera, et cetera. So it's making sure that knowledge is sitting within that district council as well, and they can act, in a manner. As I say, everything was sitting there. I rang Brent, and he said they can do it, through the Emergency Management Act. They don't need to come to us and ask permission. So I'm just articulating that knowledge needs to be within that group that's sitting around that table as well. That's how we always act, Noel. Yeah.
Yeah, I would understand that as having been involved in several emergencies in the past, and I'd be prepared to action rather than sit back and wait. Like you said, Julian, be proactive and get in. The nearest example is when the biscuit tin's getting low in here, maybe.
But we're hearing the minister is supportive of that sort of process. So yeah. Back to the slides.
There's a hand up, Chair.
Cool. Jen, sorry.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, just on the same thread as you were on. Question is, Julian, with the joint committees that we do have, I have observed a bit of an issue around the people coming to the table with a mandate from their council, right? making sure that their council knows what they are saying at that meeting. And then when it goes back after the meeting, how does that council really know what happened at that meeting? Something I've observed in our council last term, but it will be applying to a whole lot of them. And it's a similar thing we've faced in RTC sometimes. So have you given some thought yourself to how you might like to support the members of the committee and how the KEG would support to get that really working well?
Really, really good observation, Councillor. So you will have seen that for the first joint committee meeting on the 15th, or you may not have seen, I apologise. For the first meeting on the 15th, those who have been nominated or delegated to come as the members, the mayors and chair has also been invited to come along to that meeting. And I think that first meeting, if they are available, that first meeting will help to set the scene that actually it's not just a delegation of a meeting attendance, it is the delegation with the full decision-making powers of the chair in this case. So the way that should work, and I'll use the current example with Councillor Maguire, is the agenda will come out. The agenda will make very clear around what decisions and what discussions are happening, and Councillor Maguire should turn up fully informed and ready to make a decision without any reference back or need to report back and ask questions of this council or the chair. In most cases, if the mayors or the chair are not available to come to the 15th, I've already got a schedule in place to meet with particularly the new mayors, so I can have this conversation to support the members, because it's like anything, if you don't know, you don't know. But in this case, the joint committee member is the voice, and the joint committee member has the full, or the legislation says they have the full delegation for making decisions on behalf of the chair or the mayor at that committee.
And approving expenditure, if I
Yes.
remember. So there's budgetary, so Gary has the full implication to bind this council and to spend money. Okay, so there's a lot to it. It's not just, as he says, turning up to talk about stuff and go home after a cup of tea. It's about spending money and making binding decisions.
So in answer to your question, Councillor Nicholl, is yes, we are aware of it. And I said this to Councillor Maguire when we had a very productive conversation the other day, was the regional council does have, whilst it is one voice, it is recognised, you actually have more responsibility. You have one voice around the table and you have one vote equal to everybody else, but you're in a situation of the administrating authority that you hold more risk than anybody else, because when people say civil defence has gone wrong, it's normally, and that's, if you look at the document that's just come out about the around the government reforms, it refers to the regional council being responsible for civil defence emergency management, and it's not, and that's not entirely as black and white as that, because it's a devolved model, but you own, because you administer it, and because you employ us as staff, and because we go out there and drive on roads, and there are employment issues, and the reputational risk sits with you as much as this, or probably more with the regional council than anybody else. So so it's really important that your views are heard, and you get that across at those meetings. But it's also equally important that Councillor Maguire knows what your position is, so he can advocate for it at the table.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Jen. We'll carry on rolling through the slides. Yep.
Yeah, so the role as an administrating authority, I've just touched on this, is it is the regional council by legislation. I've talked about the earlier on in the slide that this is more around the local government. The initial one is a local government act, and making sure that we meet all those LGOIMA and other local government act meeting requirements. And then it says, and then the cost of administrative services must be agreed from time to time between each group. So it's more than democracy services. It's more than, in this case, the Civil Defence Group has said, going back in time, if you just jump forward for me, please. The Civil Defence Group has said it's more than, if it was just a small Civil Defence Group, and I'll pick on Marlborough, for example, or the Chatham Islands, then all that might be needed is that basic administrative services from a council legal bureaucracy requirement. But what this group said many years ago was, when Councillor Smith and Councillor Verco were there, was we're the most complex group in the country, we're the biggest. We can't have 11 different councils doing things 11 different ways. We're going to have a group emergency management office. And most councils, most civil defence groups do. And then that requirement is for a group emergency management office, which houses the regional staff, that small team, then requires you to employ them. It requires the regional council to find them facilities, give them fleet, all the ICT and coordination centre facilities that we do. And we've got a state of the art, and it's thanks to the Joint Committee and the support of this regional council that we've got a state of the art importance level 4 IL4 building across the road. You're more than welcome. Any of you are welcome to kind of have a walk around across the road. So the current issues being considered by us as a civil defence group are the proposed emergency management bill. What's interesting in that is, from the papers that have been proactively released to date, there is no transformational change of the structure of emergency management planned. It still will be locally delivered emergency management services by local authorities, and I think that is a real plus. That is the strength of the devolved model. We can't run things from the centre here. We don't know the communities don't know us, and we don't know the very, very localised hazards and capabilities and weaknesses. So that's likely to stay. NEMA are likely, as a national agency, where it does get transformational, is NEMA as a national body are likely to get rule-making or regulation-making powers to make it easier to compel civil defence groups to do things, but with that compulsion comes cost. So there will be no doubt some financial implications of some of the regulations that are set by NEMA. There is some very, very good rationale for the need for regulation. I've been around the system now for 12 years, and 16 civil defence groups. A lot of them, we all think that we're different and we should do it differently to the people next door, and our computer system's better than the people up the road, and our training is more effective than the people down in Southland. So I have no doubt in my mind that the director of emergency management or chief executive of NEMA will push the button if he gets those rule-making powers on day one that says you will all have the same ICT system, you will all do the same training. For example, as an example, and you will all have controllers and recovery managers, which are statutory appointments that are of a certain qualification and experience. Now, they will come, no doubt, with a price tag. So it's how those regulations, our role is to advocate for how those regulations are phased when it happens, so it can align with LTPs and alike. So some of the other drivers are the emergencies that we talked about, Gabriel, Nelson fires, etc. Other government reforms that are having an impact, and I say impact in a positive way in a lot of cases. So there's the resource management reform in terms of the emergency management provisions for the Minister of the Environment to have faster regulatory adjustments. Then we've got the potential local government reform. Some of them announced very recently. So what does that mean for the regional? I think under the regional reorganisation plan that's going to be required, then there is and I say this as a risk, and I put it as a small r, is civil defence is listed on that in that category of services that need to be looked at under that reorganisation plan or proposed reorganisation plan. and it's in the bucket along with things like enforcement, regulatory enforcement, and other legislative functions that maybe could go to central government. I would say one of the big advantages that we at a regional level of civil defence provide to local emergency management is that we're close enough to the ground to understand what works and to hear the voice of what works. We are not central government, so it aids it's a very good relationship. There's no other, it's a very good relationship with local government, and we're able to support NEMA in some of their thinking in terms of what works locally, rather than having things being sent from Wellington straight down to local authorities. So we act as that filter. If we become a central government agency, which is a potential in those reorg plans, then over time it just becomes central government straight through to local government, and there's no filter. So I would just need to understand how to be able to advise you on any submissions around that. We'd need to understand what was in place to enable that we weren't just a central government unit trying to coordinate local authority directly.
The implications of it, yeah. Robbie.
Yeah, I was actually going back to the disasters that you had up there on the slide back from the previous slide, and it's actually interesting because in my point, something I've got to chat about is that in the 2019 floods, I think they were 19 when we had another cyclone come through from Australia. The Piako and the Waitara rivers went into full flood, and it was an Easter weekend. Yet we're in I think we're in an emergency, but they wouldn't pull a state of emergency. But when you're saying earlier is better, because your ex-mayor of Coromandel, Sandra Gowdy, was going, please come up the Coromandel, but there actually wasn't a lot of there was quite a few roads closed to get there, so she was actually causing chaos by saying get to the Coromandel, but most of the roads were closed getting there, and that's a good call that you can call a preemptive measure to go, no, you shouldn't be going there, because it was putting, if we had another 100 mil downpour, it wouldn't have been just the severe flooding we had. It would have actually been most probably topping stock banks, flooding all the Hauraki plains, and all sorts of stuff would have been going on. But all mayors were interested in was getting people to spend money in the Coromandel that weekend. So you see where I'm coming from with that?
I can, and this is why you have a number of mayors.
And I'm not meaning she was doing anything wrong. She was doing what her constituents wanted at the time, but it wasn't looking at the big picture of the safety of everybody in the wider region. That's all.
And we have a look, and ultimately the power sits with the mayor for those districts, but there is another level. There was actually two other levels.
Keith. Yeah, just a question, Julian, and it's probably a political question, but I think it needs an answer. So you mentioned earlier that the territorial army is throwing their toys because they want to fight wars, not national disasters. And so I'm saying, well, in other countries like America has the National Guard, deals with local disasters. Is there something that we could do to say to government, let's use the territorials as our equivalent of the National Guard or something similar? And there's an opportunity for a lot of the unemployed to actually be trained up to be grunts on the ground for this sort of situation. So I'm just saying it's an opportunity, but we're sort of standing back from it because we need, when a disaster happens, you need things to happen quickly, even if it's just filling sandbags.
Yes, you might, if you're going to make a comment. Yeah. Did you want to? Yeah.
I can answer part of. So I just want to be, if I've misspoken, I just need to clarify. The Defence Force have always been really, really responsive. Whenever I've asked for them, I've got them. They've never thrown the toys out. They've turned up, but I've been told after they've turned up and they've done some work for us that I am They are in a difficult position just to find staying where they are. They want to help. They absolutely want to help. But legislatively and procedurally, I have put them in an awkward position, given them the tasks that I gave them. And I'm particularly talking around 2018, and it was the Firth of Thames flood. And it was actually, this doesn't meet the threshold. But I will say now they were there and they were happy to be there. In Cyclone Gabriel, they turned up, we got them from Thames, we got them up to Thames, and exactly the same. They were more than happy to get engaged. So they've never thrown their toys out. They've been very, very flexible with me. I apologize if I gave that impression, but I was told ultimately I was keeping them longer than I should have, and they were being used for things that were not the role of the Defence Force, because the Defence Force are, it's a small, as I understand it, they're a small group of people who have always got the next threat on the horizon. They're not just sat there waiting for emergency management and the, if you want, the military aid to the civil community. They are waiting for, they're on standby for something else, whether it's going out to the islands or doing something. In terms of the bigger picture of should they be doing things in the community, I'll stay out of that one. I'll stay out of that one because I'm not here to talk about what I think that the Defence Force should be doing, or setting their staff up from. All I can tell you is and reassure you is, and I'm not being political here, I'm being absolutely genuine. Every time I've asked for them, they have turned up. They've turned up promptly. They've done what I've asked of them. And I've never been turned down. During Gabriel, when I asked for resources from joint headquarters. I had a meeting with it. So I had the territorials, but I also asked for additional resources from joint headquarters. I was on the meeting with them, and I was up front and said, the moment you send these people up to TCDC, I need to be candid with you. If this weather plays out the way it's going to play out, I suspect they're going to be landlocked there, and you're going to have a contingency plan to get them out, to send them to the next place, because and they were still happy to do it. I've never, but in terms of their level of resourcing and capacity, and whether they should be doing more, I'll stay out.
Thanks, Julian. I'm going to go to Gary for a last question or comment, and then I'm going to come to Brent just for an understanding of councillors around the civil defence staff training that we do, just so councillors have got an overview of what of where we are in that space. It does come back to us, council, in a report, but for those new councillors and a reminder to myself, I'll get Brent to comment. But your last question, Gary, or comment?
With you to what Julian's just said there about sort of being embarrassed by legislation, would it be the feeling of this committee that we look to talk to government about changing those parameters, which is to we haven't been fighting too many wars lately. There's not too many bullets flying locally, but to have our defence force action ready, and I'm sure that they would be far better off training and working in the community and proving to the community that they're there for them than sitting around waiting for a war that may or may not come, and let's hope it doesn't. But yeah, so is it the feeling of this committee then that that's something that we would do, would be as a council promote law change on that?
So what I would suggest then, Gary, as the representative on this committee as it stands, bring something to the council to put in front of Judith Collins as the Minister of Defence, because that's where it sits in that space. If you believe there's some lobbying or something that could happen in that space, I'm picking it would have to be quite specific around what the thoughts were, and obviously you would need full council support in that space. But happy to see something come through that space. Brent.
Really good timing that Greg walked into the room, because this is going to be a bit of a teams act. So it's really clear for the council what different members of your executive are responsible for. So my responsibility is that I am Chris's delegate on KEG, just the same way that Gary is your delegate on Joint Committee. So I will be attending KEG as one of the CEs. So KEG is the coordinating executive group. I think of it as effectively the ELT for civil defence, and the joint committee is the council for civil defence. And so I will talk with Chris about things which come forward around being fulfilling the chief executive's role at KEG. I'm also, on behalf of council, Julian's employer. I don't direct Julian, but Julian gets directed by the KEG and the joint committee, but I support Julian. So I support Julian, I help him with stuff, I will help him with staffing matters, all those sorts of things in terms of our administrating role, but I'm the employer, so I'm not. So if there's civil defence things, and because I have civil defence responsibilities here, that doesn't mean you ask me to do something and I direct Julian. Just need to make that really clear, that Julian doesn't get his direction from me, he gets my support and my assistance. This council has responsibilities around emergency management, including ensuring that we have sufficient people to be trained to be able to support civil defence when the need comes. Greg's part of the business deals with our emergency response type functions, and you've come across people like Derek Hartley and others, and so that's what's a bit of a team act. So I thought Greg could just give you a little bit of a summary about what Greg's team does in terms of meeting our responsibilities around emergency management.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. And I'll start with the link between civil defence, because our emergency management goes much wider than civil defence. So my emergency management team coordinates the training of our staff, and that was a particular question I heard come from the committee. And so we participants in the integrated training framework. There are various levels of training. There's an initial level, which is a required induction training from all staff that enter council. So we ensure that anyone new has this initial, I think it's about 2 or 3 hours, to introduce them to the concepts of civil defence. We also have a target to have a quarter of our staff trained to level 2, which is an intermediate level training, which gives staff a much more in-depth understanding for the general civil defence structure and the different functions that are required during a civil defence response. Our performance in that regard is we do have 25% of our staff trained, but there is always pressure on that through either staff leaving from time to time, but also needing to make sure that staff receive refresher training. We have a number of staff that have been trained for a number of years. We don't have that many events, so it's always good to, yes, I'll touch wood. We need to make sure that we keep on top of the refresher training that comes through. The next focus for us gets into more specialised training in terms of different functions for civil defence, whether it be logistics or operations, planning or intelligence. That's the level 3 and 4 training, which is our next area of focus, where we do need to lift and really take those high performing staff members who demonstrate themselves in level 2 training and take them forward into leadership training in level 3. Our emergency management team also looks after our flood response function. So they're the guys who will be coordinating the system that emails you when we've got major events happening and providing that regional coordination. They also coordinate our marine oil spill capability. So we have a tier 2 capability, which is again providing regional coordination, providing regional on scene commander, undertaking 2 exercises a year, and utilising and managing the equipment that's stored out at Northgate and Pyroa.
Thanks for that, Greg. And I notice councillors may have a couple more questions, and I think if they're relevant to our roles, you can take it offline with the various staff here. Just note, Tipper online, did you have another question, comment for Julian just before I wrap this up?
Just a quick one for our team, and thank them all for being there. Not for now, but when we do get at council, when we have our health and safety report, could someone identify our PCBU responsibilities with regards to civil defence particularly, or in the events? Thank you. Kia ora.
Thanks for that, Tipper. Right, I'll wind it up there. So thank you very much, Julian, for your presentation. It does open our eyes to what's going on in this space. So it's great for councillors to get a handle on where we are in the space and what's going on. Please take up Julian's offer to have a look around the operations centre. I'm going to be doing it next week. So apparently I have to bring coffee. So that might be a suggestion for any of you too. And that's it for it. We will be back, let's call it 1:05. after lunch for our final workshop. So thank you again, Julian, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, councillors.